The subcommittee will come to order, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Pursuant to notice, the subcommittee meets this afternoon to mark up H.R. 1940, now titled the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act of 2012, H.R. 3605, the Global Online Freedom Act of 2012, and H.R. 4141, now named the Donald M. Payne International Food Assistance Improvement Act of 2012. As our members are aware, these measures enjoy strong bipartisan support. They have been the subject of extensive hearings, and in the case of the Global Online Freedom Act, I first introduced that legislation back in 2006, and hearings with Google, Yahoo, and others followed, as well as with the administration. And in like manner, the International Child Abduction Act, now named after Sean and David Goldman, was first introduced in 2009, and in like manner, we had a number of hearings on that legislation, vetting the language and working on best practices and what ought to be included, and that is what's before the members today. Thus, it's the intent of the chair to consider these bills en bloc and by unanimous consent, including the substitute amendments sent to each of you on Friday, and an additional amendment sent to you yesterday. All members have copies of those documents before them. Then, after we have concluded our expedited consideration of these bills, I will be glad, and amendments, I will be glad to recognize first myself, then my good friend and colleague, Ranking Member Bass, and other members, including the Vice Chair, Mr. Fortenberry, and Mr. Turner, and others, who will then make statements on each of the pending legislation before us. All members are given leave to insert written remarks into the record, should they choose to do so. Seeing that a reporting quorum is present, without objection, the following measures, which the members have before them, are considered as read, shall be deemed adopted, and are hereby reported favorably to the full Committee on Foreign Affairs. H.R. 1940, known as the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act of 2012. The Smith Amendment, number 64 to H.R. 1940, the amendment in the nature of a substitute provided to your offices on Friday. H.R. 3605, the Global Online Freedom Act of 2012, the Smith Amendment number 69 to H.R. 3605, the amendment in the nature of a substitute providing also to your offices on Friday, and H.R. 4141, the International Food Assistance Improvement Act of 2012, and the Bass Amendment number 35 to H.R. 4141, which is the amendment sent to your offices on Monday, which adds our good friend and now deceased member, Donald Payne's name, to the title of that objection, of that legislation. Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The amended bills are adopted, and without objection, the staff is directed to make technical and conforming changes. I now would like to recognize myself to speak to H.R. 1940 as amended. And I want to thank my colleagues on the subcommittee for supporting this legislation and for your input as we've crafted its various provisions. H.R. 1940, the Sean and David Goldman Child Abduction and Prevention and Return Act of 2012. It was David Goldman's unrelenting effort to bring his son Sean home from Brazil that first alerted me to the epidemic of international parental child abduction in this country. According to the U.S. State Department, between 2008 and 2010, bereaved parents left behind, like David Goldman, reported over 3,200 abduction cases involving more than 4,700 children. I had the privilege of joining David in his fight to return Sean and experienced firsthand the maddening obstacles encountered by left-behind parents, even in countries that had signed the Hague Convention on International Child Abduction. Foreign courts, endless appeals to run out the clock, exploitation of the safeguards in the convention, and prejudice against foreigners, as David has told this subcommittee in numerous hearings that I've chaired on the subject. For 5.5 years of that battle, he lived, and this is his quote, in a world of despondency and desperation, with a searing pain throughout my entire being. He went on to say, everywhere I turned, I saw the image of my abducted child, close quote. I am pleased to see David Goldman is in the audience today and submit this bill is in his honor and in honor of his formerly abducted son, Sean. And frankly, it's in honor of all of the parents, and there are several others in the audience today, and their abducted children, for whom the Hague Convention has been a long and bitter disappointment. My bill, H.R. 1940 as amended, will encourage effective implementation of the Hague Abduction Convention and create strong disincentives for incentives for compliance and disincentives for non-compliance by countries that currently enable abductors and perpetuate child abuse through weak convention implementation. H.R. 1940 as amended is also for the left behind parents and bereaved children who have been taken to countries that are not party to the Hague Convention. Parents like Michael Elias, a combat-injured Iraqi veteran from New Jersey, whose ex-wife used her Japanese consulate connections to abduct little Jade and Michael Jr. after the New Jersey court had ordered surrender of passports and joint custody. Ms. Nakamura flagrantly disregarded those valid court orders, telling Michael Elias, and I quote her, "My country, Japan, will protect me." Sadly, she was right. Although Japan is reportedly prosecuting her for abusing her consulate connections, they will not return the children. At a hearing last May, Michael Elias told this committee that as a father who no longer has his children to hold in his arms, I cannot deal with the sorrow, so I will try my best to stay strong and keep fighting for their return. All my hopes and dreams for their future now lie in the hands of others. He continued, I am begging our government to help not only my family, but hundreds of others, heartbroken families as well, to demand the return of our American children who are being held in Japan. U.S. Navy Commander Paul Toland, who was here with us, with some of the left behind dads from Japan, whose children are in Japan, also knows firsthand the pain suffered by all of the left behind parents. His daughter, Erica Toland, was living with Paul and his wife in Navy housing in Yokohama, Japan, when Isuko took Erica in 2003 and never returned. Tragically, his wife passed away in 2007, and yet Commander Toland has continually been denied access to his daughter. We have in the past had hearings with some of the other left behind parents, and we will include in this record some of those testimonials, and we're planning in about a month to 6 weeks' time yet another hearing to hear firsthand from those families and from those left behind parents the plight that they face, the obstacles they encounter with our U.S. Department of State and the Office of Children's Issues, in the hope that finally they will get their children home. According to the Office of Children's Issues at the State Department, there are more than 111 American children being held in Japan. Others say it's much higher than that, against the will of their American parent. More than 40 others are not allowed access to their American parent. Japan has yet to issue and enforce any court order for the return of a single American child abducted to Japan. I look forward to that day, and I believe that day will happen soon when these kids are brought home, and I do believe H.R. 1940 as amended takes us a step closer. International parental child abduction rips children from their homes and lives, taking them to a foreign land and alienating them from a left-behind parent who loves them and who has a right to know. Their childhood is disrupted, or sometimes in hiding as the taking parent seeks to evade the law or to conjure legal cover for their abusive actions. Abducted children often lose their relationship with their mom or their dad, half of their identity and half of their culture. They are at risk of serious emotional and psychological problems and may experience anxiety, eating problems, nightmares, mood swings, sleep disturbances, aggressive behavior, resentment, guilt, and fearfulness. As adults, they may struggle with identity issues, their own personal relationships, and parenting. All of this has been chronicled over and over again and is one of the main reasons why the Hague Convention was adopted back in 1980 in the first place. the body of evidence of that has only exploded over the years since. Parental child abduction is child abuse. Too many families have been waiting too long for the return of their children. Our current system, with its endless delays and lack of proper accountability, has failed far too many. It is time for the approach that backs our demands for adherence to international obligations with penalties and make clear to foes and friends alike that our children are our top priority. The amendment that was just approved by unanimous consent will achieve this goal by giving the President important tools to motivate other countries to quickly respond to applications for an abducted child's return. For even one case that has been pending for over 6 weeks in a foreign country's judicial system, the President may choose to at least issue a private démarche or take more serious actions commensurate with the gravity of the case. If a country has 10 or more cases of children abducted from the U.S., pursuant to this legislation, and those cases are not being resolved in a timely manner, or the entity responsible for working with the U.S. Central Authority, the judiciary, or law enforcement are persistently failing to fulfill their obligations, the President can take measured, effective, and predictable actions to aggressively advocate for our children's return. Such actions range from denial of certain assistance to prohibiting the procurement of certain goods or services from the government, or instrumentality responsible for the pattern of non-cooperation. Of course, the President is directed to consult with the government concerned and report to Congress when contemplating serious actions. The President is also provided with certain waiver authorities that take into account the important national interests of the U.S. However, the expectation is that the President will use all tools necessary to bring our children home in a timely manner, and that the President will have to explain the minority of cases where a delineated tool cannot be used. And I will put into the record, and it's in the legislation, all 17 of the prescribed actions that the President can take. And they are serious. We patterned it after lessons learned from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, which I authored, and the legislation called the International Religious Freedom Act, which I helped get passed. It was authored by my good friend and colleague, Frank Wolf, prescribing specific actions to be taken against governments that show this non-cooperation or a pattern of non-cooperation. I would like to now yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Bass, for comments she might have on the child abduction legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have to say, as this is my first committee hearing as a ranking member, that I can't not begin by expressing again my sadness for the loss of our colleague, Representative Payne, but I am thankful for the opportunity to serve as ranking member and to serve alongside of you and your leadership that you've had for so many years on these issues. It's fitting that during this first subcommittee meeting after the loss of our friend and colleague that we're going to consider several measures aimed at protecting the most vulnerable among us, children, the disenfranchised, and the hungry, whom Representative Payne fought to protect throughout his career. Representative Payne was a leader on international human rights issues and especially concerned with protecting the rights of children and young people. And I, of course, want to commend you, Chairman Smith, for your dedication to promoting adherence to the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction, for encouraging nations to adopt the convention, and for consistently pursuing justice for our children. Last year, you convened 2 subcommittee hearings on international child abduction, and during the first of those hearings, we all heard the heartbreaking stories of parents whose children were abducted to a foreign country. David Goldman, who's here today, Mr. Goldman, I have to tell you that I watched your story for years on TV, and also you, and I never had any idea, of course, that I would wind up serving in Congress and having an opportunity to meet you, but I just really, can't imagine what it was like, what you went through, and I'm very happy that you're reunited with your son, and really want to congratulate you for your leadership in helping to bring that about, Mr. Chairman. I know the Elias family is represented by the grandmother that is here. That's you there, and thank you for attending today, and also, over the time you have shared your story with us. This legislation that is offered by Chairman Smith would finally give proper due diligence to this often neglected crisis by creating an Office on International Child Abductions within the State Department and by expanding the President's authority to act decisively to bring these children home. The community that I represent in Los Angeles has also been impacted by this horrific crime. Several of my constituents have reached out to me and told me about their children that have been abducted. There's one family that we've been working with for quite a while whose child was abducted to Japan. And so I appreciate you bringing forward this bill, and I look forward to continuing to support the efforts until all the children are returned home. Thank you.
Ms. Bass, thank you so very much, and welcome to the committee. And as both you and I and so many others who were at Don Payne's funeral, it was a huge loss to the Congress and a great friend, especially of those who are suffering the ravages of famine and natural disasters in the subcontinent of Africa. But welcome to the subcommittee as ranking member. Look forward to working with you. I'd like to now yield to the vice chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your important leadership on this and so many other issues. What more important function can our government undertake than to prevent the abduction of American children? Thousands of children have been subjected to this abuse. Thousands of children have been treated as international pawns. Think of the thousands of children who lie silently in their beds except for the crying that can perhaps not be heard by anyone but themselves. A child's pain should know no international boundary, and a child's suffering is enough due to the separation of their family unit. So I want to thank you, Mr. Smith, for your important leadership. International child abduction is too common, and past legal and diplomatic barriers have been too high for the families who have had to suffer through this problem. Establishing the Office of the International Child Abductions within the State Department, I'm hopeful may impart a focused and whole-of-government approach to returning abducted children to the United States and preventing more families from the heartbreak and difficulties that this has caused. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the former U.S. Attorney from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
Thank you, Chairman. As a prosecutor for 18 years, I've had the unfortunate task of dealing with issues that are such heartbreaking issues as child abduction, from a domestic perspective and from an international perspective. And I can only thank the chairman for holding this hearing, putting this legislation together that will really put some teeth into the laws that The Hague should have implemented a long time ago. So the chairman and, of course, the parents out here and the parents that aren't here and the children that have been abducted have my total support, and that is a commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Mr. Turner from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was reminded of something in another life. I ran an entertainment company. A woman named Kathy Mahone came in to sell her television rights, which ultimately was a TV movie called Rescue My Child. And her 8-year-old daughter was abducted following a divorce and falsely sent to Jordan. And failing to get any satisfaction from the State Department or through the courts, she took some extra-legal methods and hired what were called consultants at the time, ex-military people, who literally went in and re-kidnapped the child and got her out. This extra-legal method has pretty much closed down. The principals of the company were a little tired of going to jail and getting shot at and all the other things that they had to endure over the years. I'm hoping what we've done today will be a legal step that will facilitate this, and I applaud you for it. Thank you.
Turner, thank you so very much. Chair recognizes a woman who happens to be both a lawyer and a nurse and has been, like the other members of this subcommittee, tenacious in combating human rights, and it's Anne Marie Burgle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to echo my colleagues' thoughts to you. Thank you for your leadership on this extremely important issue. We sat through several months ago a hearing about child abduction and listened to the anguished testimony of parents who had lost their children. So this piece of legislation will, as my colleague said, put teeth into what the Hague Convention should be doing. It's the right thing to do. As a mother of 6 children, I can only imagine the pain that you've all felt by having your child abducted. So we are so pleased to be able to work with you to get this passed. Thank you so much.
I want to thank my good friend and colleague. I just want to note before we move on to the Global Online Freedom Act, unless any colleagues have anything further to say, and you mentioned this, Mr. Turner, the importance of the media, television and print, all media, but to bring the message forward to sensitize and mobilize people. I would be remiss if I didn't note that Dateline did a tremendous public service for David and every other left behind parent, and Meredith Vieira is here, and Benita Noel. Benita was the producer and was with David throughout that process. Meredith carried frequently, like almost every day in some cases, vital information as to what was happening in real time and what a difference that made, and then got it all together for various Dateline specials. And not only did it help David Goldman and Sean get reunited, and Sean repatriated to the U.S. with his dad, but I do believe it has helped all the other left behind parents. And this is still a festering sore when it comes to issues. The pain that these men and women suffer is beyond words to describe, and yet they continually push hard. But thank you for amplifying their concerns in such a magnificent way. Any further comments on that legislation? If not, now we'll move to the consideration of the debate on H.R. 3605, the Global Online Freedom Act. In December, I introduced H.R. 3605, which was an updating of the Global Online Freedom Act that I first introduced, as I mentioned earlier, back in 2006, that responds to the growing global use of the internet as a tool of censorship and surveillance, as a means of capturing, apprehending the best and the brightest in dictatorship countries all over the world, including and especially in China. Members might recall back in 2006, we had our first hearing in this subcommittee, and I swore in all of the leaders from Google, Yahoo, Cisco, and Microsoft, and the answers that they gave at that time were very unavailing. They didn't want to tell us what they were doing in places like China, but we persisted. We wrote legislation, the Global Online Freedom Act, and today we have a refined and I think an even more effective draft of legislation that moves to the full committee to try to combat this misuse of the internet. The threat to human rights is very serious. Reporters Without Borders just released its Internet Enemies list that names the countries that violate their citizens' online freedoms. Their reports tell us that China, Vietnam, and Iran are the world's biggest prisons for netizens. Other countries are not lagging far behind. For example, the government of Pakistan recently announced a public bid for companies to help them build their own version of China's Great Firewall. The public outcry caused by the government to withdraw the bid, but I'm skeptical that plans for the firewall are actually scrapped. Likely this procurement has simply been moved behind the scenes and out of public scrutiny. Sadly, it's through the assistance of Western companies and technologies that this includes American companies and technology, that governments like Iran, China, and Syria, and many others are transforming the internet into a weapon of mass surveillance. Just as we jealously guard our media freedoms and our personal freedoms, and would be horrified if American companies sold newspaper censorship services abroad, we also need to ensure that our companies and our capital markets are not censoring the internet abroad. The internet holds great promise, but also because it can be censored and surveilled, the potential of great peril. The Global Online Freedom Act is designed to help ensure that U.S. companies are not complicit in repression of human rights. We need to move now to ensure fundamental freedoms are protected. First, the Global Online Freedom Act requires the State Department to beef up its reporting on internet freedom in the annual country reports for human rights practices, and to identify by name what we call internet restricting countries. This country designation will be useful not only in a diplomatic context, in helping to advance internet freedom through naming and shaming countries, but will also provide U.S. technology companies with the information they need to make good business decisions in difficult foreign markets. Second, the bill requires internet companies listed on the U.S. stock exchanges to disclose to the Securities and Exchange Commission how they conduct their human rights due diligence, including with regards to the collection and sharing of personally identifiable information with repressive countries, and the steps they take to notify users when they remove content or block access to content. This provision of the bill will help democratic activists and human rights defenders to hold internet companies accountable by creating a new transparency standard for internet companies. And while we certainly want to hold U.S. companies accountable, this provision will also require foreign internet service companies that are listed here in the United States, including big-name Chinese companies such as Baidu, Sohu, and Sina, to report this information as well. And finally, in response to the numerous reports we've all seen in the papers recently on U.S. technology being used to track down or conduct surveillance of activists through the internet or mobile devices, this bill will prohibit the export of hardware or software that can be used for surveillance, tracking, and blocking, and the like, to the governments of internet restricting countries. Current export control laws do not take into account the human rights impact of these exports, and therefore do not create any incentive for U.S. companies to evaluate their role in assisting repressive regimes. This section will not only help stop the sale of these items to repressive governments, but will create an important foreign policy stance for the United States that will help ensure that dissidents abroad know that we are on their side and that U.S. businesses are not profiting from this repression. The export control law is long overdue. Right now, the State Department spends millions of dollars to develop and deploy circumvention tools and other technologies to help dissidents get information and to communicate safely. Truly, it is absurd for us to allow U.S. companies to export blocking and surveillance technologies to these countries, only to have the State Department then spend money to help dissidents get around those same technologies. What we do here in the United States is critically important to achieving our goals, and I believe that this legislation will send a strong message to companies that they have a unique role to play in preserving online freedom, and that we send an even stronger message to repressive governments that the internet should not become a tool of repression. I yield to the ranking member, Ms. Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Free speech has long been a hallmark of a healthy democracy and a free society. For over 2 billion people worldwide, the internet and new communication technologies have become unprecedented tools for expanding their ability to speak and receive information, participate in political and democratic processes, and share knowledge and ideas. For over a year now, we have witnessed what has been dubbed the Arab Spring. In countries throughout the Arab world, via the internet and social networking, citizens have communicated, organized, and raised awareness of their plight under repressive regimes. Sites such as Facebook and Twitter have played a major role in these uprisings. Whatever you may think about the outcome of those movements, one thing is clear. The long-suspected power of the internet to bring about political change has been confirmed, and that is very positive. The prevalence of these uprisings has caused governments to enact stricter policies against political dissent and further restrict access to information in online networking tools. As Representative Payne repeated in our hearing on this topic last December, former President Clinton once said that trying to control the internet would be like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Unfortunately, there are regimes around the world that are attempting to do just that, and some with relative success. Yet determined to share their stories, protesters and bloggers living in these countries are still finding ways to access the internet because of the technologies made available by companies like Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, and others. For example, in Syria, where there is extremely limited freedom of the press and unconscionable repression, activists are using an iPhone application to disseminate news and online information about their protest against Assad. The bill also requires U.S.-listed internet communication providers to report on their human rights due diligence with regard to foreign policies on internet privacy and repression. While I support the overall goal of the bill, I hope that we can continue to refine the language at the full committee such as it does not adversely impact U.S. companies that are providing a tremendous service to many people across the globe who have no other way to see beyond their borders, shed light on their plight, and mobilize their communities for change. But as the chairman pointed out, it's a perfect example of a U.S. company that would export technology that would block access, and then we provide funding so that they can go around it, is exactly the type of abuse that we want to get at. So that said, I commend you, Chairman Smith, for your leadership on this issue.
Vice Chairman Fortberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. American leadership and innovation was responsible for the remarkable technological breakthrough known as the Internet, which spurred the advent of globalization and this unprecedented industrial revolution of our new century. And it has become a way of life since then. Globalization, of course, carries marvelous potential for progress to benefit mankind, but it also involves unprecedented risk and challenges, including the challenge of applying fundamental principles to the use of new and vibrant and transformative technologies. U.S. companies operating around the world are routinely required to abide by local laws of the countries in which they operate, just as foreign countries are required to abide by U.S. law. Mr. Chairman, I recall that the hearing in which you held on this topic in the 109th Congress, and at that time, the fundamental question we addressed there still applies today, whether U.S. companies have an obligation to comport themselves in a manner consistent with the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights when local laws overseas conflict with the basic foundational principles upon which our laws are based. The Global Online Freedom Act seeks to integrate these foundational human rights principles into the complexities of our participation in the vast global technology marketplace. So I urge my colleagues, and thank you as well, Mr. Chairman, to continue to support this thoughtfully developed measure. And again, thank you for your tireless efforts in this regard.
Fortenberry, thank you very much for your comments and for your leadership as well. I'd just like to point out that the Global Online Freedom Act has had a broad amount of support. This morning we just received a letter of support from Yahoo, Freedom House, Amnesty International, and I know T. Kumar is here, and thank you for your support, as well as helping us to put it together. Human Rights Watch, Access, and a group letter signed by 13 leading human rights organizations, all in support of the Global Online Freedom Act. Without objection, those letters will be made a part of the record. We now move for debate purposes to the third bill, H.R. 4141 as amended. The newly named Donald M. Payne, and thank you, I'd say to Ms. Bass for naming it so out of deep respect for our deceased colleague. The Donald M. Payne International Food Assistance Improvement Act of 2012. This bill was originally introduced and still it's his bill by Mr. Payne before he passed away on March 6th. The bill is based on important recommendations that have been made by the Government Accountability Office in a report that they issued in May of 2011 on, quote, better nutrition and quality control can further improve U.S. food aid, as well as other studies on the same subject funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. As the GAO pointed out in its report, the U.S. spent approximately $1.5 billion on emergency food aid in fiscal year 2010, assisting nearly 46.5 million women, men, and children. In fact, the U.S. is the world's largest donor of international food assistance, providing more than half of global food aid supplies. It's imperative that this assistance not only satisfy people's hunger, but that it meets their fundamental nutritional needs as well. The statistics of the prevalence and impact of undernutrition are absolutely staggering. It is reported that 3.5 million children around the world die each year as a direct result of undernutrition. Others who suffer from malnutrition are often debilitated for the rest of their lives. Children who do not receive adequate nutrition during the first 1,000 days of life, beginning with conception through their second birthday, suffer from stunted physical and cognitive development. They have increased risks of illness, not only in early life, but also later as adults from such diseases as diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and cancers. Mothers who are undernourished are more often likely to have low birth weight babies, leading to a multi-generational cycle of undernutrition and even disability. Mr. Payne's H.R. 4141, which the subcommittee has just adopted, directs the administrator of USAID to use currently available funds to improve the nutritional quality of U.S. food assistance, particularly for vulnerable groups such as pregnant and lactating mothers, children under the age of 5, and beneficiaries of the U.S. HIV/AIDS programming, or PEPFAR. Possible measures that may be taken include the adoption of new specifications for micronutrient fortified food aid products, strengthening assessment of the quality of food donations, and improving guidance to implementing partners on how to address nutrient deficiencies in certain aid recipients. H.R. 4141, as amended, will also include nutrition science experts in the Food Aid Consultative Group created by the Food for Peace Act. The bill calls on the administrator to work within this group to improve quality control and cost effectiveness of food assistance programs through increased coordination and oversight. Finally, the USAID administrator would need to ensure that food assistance programs carried out under the Food for Peace Act contribute to any U.S. global food security strategy. Again, I want to thank Ms. Bass for offering the amendment to aim and add Mr. Payne's name to this title, which is truly a remarkable way to honor this wonderful man. Ms. Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for accepting the amendment and including this, because we really wanted to honor Representative Payne, and we thought this was a great way to do it, to change the name of the bill. Malnutrition, as you mentioned, is the #1 risk to health globally, accounting for the deaths of 3.5 million children under 5 years old and impairing hundreds of thousands of growing minds. This has profound consequences not only for the child's future, but also for the long-term health and development of families, communities, and societies. The human and economic costs of malnutrition are enormous. Women, children, and the poor are, of course, the most hit. For over 55 years, the United States has been a world leader in international food aid, delivering life-saving calories to the most vulnerable of populations, often in conflict zones. However, while our efforts are great, the ongoing food crisis in the Horn of Africa is just one example of how the challenge is growing. As revealed in recent reports by the Government Accountability Office and Tufts University, there are a number of ways in which our food aid initiatives can and must be improved, including increased nutritional quality, greater oversight and quality controls, and an enhanced value chain. This bill incorporates these recommendations and ensures that our food aid programs are smart, effective, and efficient. The bill directs USAID to work with USDA and the Food Aid Consultative Group to adopt new specifications for food aid products, work to strengthen systems to better assess the types and quality of agricultural commodities and products, adjust products to cost-effectively meet nutritional needs, develop new program guidance to better target recipients, and provide improved guidance to implementing partners on how to adequately address nutritional deficiencies. It also would ensure that food aid programs are integrated into our global food security strategy. H.R. 4141 is a wonderful example of Congressman Payne's lifelong commitment to addressing the needs of the underserved, fostering innovation in humanitarian assistance, and advancing America's leadership across the globe. Thank you.
Ms. Bass, thank you very much. And I look forward to working with you as the new ranking member. And I would like to thank, for the record, all the members for their constructive help in crafting these bills as we take them to the full committee and then onto the floor and down to the President's desk. Without objection, the markup is adjourned.